20. The Ogres' Castle. Between 6 and 9 we made 10 miles, which was plenty for a horse carrying triple, man, woman, and armor. Then we stopped for a long nooning under some trees by a limpid brook. Right so came by a knight riding. As he drew near, he made a dolorous moan, and by the words of it I perceived that he was cursing and swearing. Yet nevertheless was I glad of his coming, for I saw he bore a bulletin board, whereon in letters of shining gold was writ, "Use Peterson's prophylactic toothbrush, all the go." I was glad of his coming, for even by this token I knew him for a knight of mine. It was Sir Maddock de la Montaigne, a burly great fellow whose chief distinction was that he had come within an ace of sending Sir Launcelot down over his horsetail once. He was never long in a stranger's presence without finding some pretext or other to get let out that great fact. But there was another fact of nearly the same size, which he never pushed upon anybody unasked, and yet never withheld when asked. That was the reason he didn't quite succeed was that he was interrupted and sent down over a horsetail himself. This innocent vast lubber did not see any particular difference between the two facts. I liked him, for he was earnest in his work and very valuable. And as he was so fine to look at, with his broad mailed shoulders and grand leonine set of his plumed head, and his big shield with its quaint device of a gauntleted hand clutching a prophylactic toothbrush with the motto, "Try, no you don't." This was the toothwash that I was introducing. He was a weary, he said, and indeed he looked it, but he would not alight. He said he was after stove polish, man, and with his brook out, cursing and swearing anew. The bulletin boarder referred to was Sir Osace Sir Luce, a brave knight and of considerable celebrity on account of having tried conclusions in a tournament once, with no less a mogul than Sir Garrus himself, although not successfully. He was of a light and laughing disposition, and to him nothing in this world was serious. For it was this reason I had chosen him to work up as a stove-polish sentiment. There were no stoves yet, and so there could be nothing serious about stove-polish. And all the agent needed to do was deftly and by degrees prepare the public for the great change, and have them established in predilections toward neatness against the time when the stove should appear on the stage. Sir Maddock was very bitter, and brake anew with cursings. He said he had cursed his soul to rags, and yet he would not go down from his horse, neither would he take rest, or listen to any comfort, until he should have found Sir Osace and settled this account. It appeared, by what I could piece together of the unprofaned fragments of his statement, that he had chanced upon Sir Osain at dawn of the morning, and had been told that if he would make a short cut across the fields and swamps and broken hills and glades, he could head off a company of travelers who would be rare customers for prophylactics and toothwash. With characteristic zeal, Sir Maddock plunged away at once upon this quest, and after 3 hours of awful cross-lot riding had overhauled his game. And beheld, it was 5 patriarchs that had been released from the dungeons the evening before. Poor old creatures, it was all of 20 years since any one of them had known what it was to be equipped with any remaining snag or remnant of a tooth. "Blank, blank, blank him," said Sir Maddock, "and I do not stove polish him, I may find him. Leave it to me, for never no knight that hight Osace or aught else do me this disservice and bide on live. And may I find him, the which I have thereunto swore a great oath this day." And with these words and others, he lightly took his spear and gat him thence. In the middle of the afternoon, we came upon one of those very patriarchs ourselves in the edge of a poor village. He was basking in the love of relatives and friends by whom he had not seen for 50 years. And about him and caressing him were also descendants of his own body, whom he had never seen at all until now. But to him these were all strangers. His memory was gone, his mind was stagnant. It seemed incredible that a man could outlast half a century shut up in a dark hole like a rat. But here were his old wife and some old comrades to testify to it. They could remember him as he was in the freshness and strength of his young manhood, when he kissed his child and delivered it to his mother's hands and went away into that long oblivion. The people at the castle could not tell within half a generation the length of time the man had been shut up there for his unrecorded and forgotten offense. But this old wife knew, and so did her child, who stood there among her married sons and daughters, trying to realize a father, who had been to her a name, a thought, a formless image, a tradition all her life, and now was suddenly concreted into actual flesh and blood and set before her face. It was a curious situation, yet it is not on that account that I have made room for it here, but on account of a thing which seemed to me still more curious, to wit, that this dreadful manner brought about from these downtrodden people no outburst of rage against the oppressors. They had been heritors and subjects of cruelty and outrage so long that nothing could have startled them but a kindness. Yes, here was a curious revelation indeed of the depth to which this people had been sunk into slavery. Their entire being was reduced to a monotonous, dead level of patience, resignation, dumb, uncomplaining acceptance of whatever might befall them in this life. Their very imagination was dead. When you can say that of a man, he has struck bottom, I reckon. There is no lower deep for him. I rather wish I had gone some other road. This was not the sort of experience for a statesman to encounter who was planning out a peaceful revolution in his mind, for it could not help bringing up the unget-aroundable fact that all gentle cant and philosophizing to the contrary notwithstanding, no people in the world ever did achieve their freedom by goody-goody talk and moral suasion, it being a mutable law that all revolutions that will succeed must begin in blood, whatever may answer afterward. If history teaches anything, it teaches that. What folks needed then was a reign of terror and a guillotine, and I was the wrong man for them. 2 days later, toward noon, Sandy began to show signs of excitement and feverish expectancy. She said we were approaching the Ogres' castle. I was surprised into an uncomfortable shock. The object of our quest had gradually dropped off of my mind. This sudden resurrection of it made it seem quite a real and startling thing for a moment, and roused up in me a smart interest. Sandy's excitement increased every moment, so did mine, for that sort of thing is catching. My heart got to thumping. You can't reason with your heart. It has its own laws and thumps about things which the intellect scorns. Presently, when Sandy slid from the horse, motioned me to stop, and went creeping stealthily with her head bent nearly to her knees toward a row of bushes that bordered a declivity, the thumpings grew stronger and quicker, and they kept at it while she was gaining her ambush and getting her glimpse over the declivity, and also while I was creeping to her side on my knees. Her eyes were burning now as she pointed with her finger and said in a panting whisper, the castle, lo, there it looms. What a welcome disappointment I experienced. I said, castle? That's nothing but a pigsty with a wattled fence around it. She looked surprised and distressed. The animation faded out of her face, and during many moments she was lost in thought and silent. Then, it is not an enchanted aforetime, she said in a musing fashion as if to herself, and how strange is this marvel, and how awful. To the one the perception is enchanted and dight in the base and shameful aspect, yet to the perception of the other is not enchanted, hath suffered no change, but stands firm and stately still, girt with its mode and waving its banners in blue air from its towers. And God shield us, how it pricks the heart to see again those gracious captives, and the sorrow deepening in their sweet faces. We have tarried along and are to blame. I saw my cue. The castle was enchanted to me, not to her. It would be a waste of time to argue her out of her delusion. It couldn't be done. I must just humor it. So I said, this is a common case, the enchanting of a thing to one eye and leaving it in its proper form to another. You haven't heard of it before, Sandy, though you haven't happened to experience it, but no harm is done. In fact, it is lucky the way it is. If those ladies were hogs to everybody and to themselves, it would be necessary to break the enchantment, and that might be impossible if one failed to find the particular process of the enchantment. And hazardous, too, for in attempting a disenchantment without the true key, you're liable to err and turn your hogs into dogs, and then dogs into cats, and cats into rats, and so on, and at the end reducing your materials to nothing finally, or to an odorless gas which you can't follow, which of course amounts to the same thing. But here, by good luck, no one's eyes but mine are under the enchantment, and so it is of no consequence to dissolve it. These ladies remain ladies to you and to themselves and to everybody else, and at the same time they will suffer in no way from my delusion. For when I know that the ostensible hog is a lady, that is enough for me, and I know how to treat her. Thanks, so sweet my Lord, thou talkst like an angel, and I know thou wilt deliver them, for thou art minded to great deeds, as art, as strong as night your hands, and as brave as will and to do, as any that is on live. I will not leave a princess in the sty, Sandy. Are those three yonder that to my disordered eyes are starveling swineherds? The ogres, are they changed also? It is most wonderful. Now I am fearful, for how canst thou strike with sure aim when 5 of their 9 cubits of stature are to thee invisible? Oh, go warily, fair sir, 'tis a mightier emprise than I wend. You be easy, Sandy. All I need to know is how much of an ogre is invisible, and then I know how to locate its vitals. But don't be afraid, I will make short work of these bunco steerers. Stay where you are. I left Sandy kneeling there, corpse-faced but plucky and hopeful, and I rode down to the pigsty and stuck up a trade with the swineherds. I won their gratitude by buying out all the hogs at a lump sum of 16 pennies, which was rather above the latest quotations. I was just in time for the church, the lord of the manor, and the rest of the tax gatherers would have been along next day and swept off pretty much all the stock, leaving the swineherds very short of hogs and Sandy out of princesses. But now the tax people could be paid in cash, and there wouldn't be a stake left beside. One of the men had 10 children, and he said last year when a priest came and his 10 pigs took the fattest ones for tithes, the wife burst out upon him and offered him a child and said, "Thou beast with the bowels of mercy, why leave me and my child, yet rob me of the wherewithal to feed it?" How curious, the same thing happened in the Wales of my day, under the same old established church, which was supposed by many to have changed its nature when it changed its disguise. I sent the 3 men away and opened the sty gate and beckoned Sandy to come, which she did, and not leisurely, but with the rush of prairie fire, and I saw her fling herself upon those hogs with tears of joy running down her cheeks, and strain them to her heart, and kiss them, and caress them, and call them reverently by the good princely names. I was ashamed of her, ashamed of the human race. We had to drive those hogs home 10 miles, and no ladies were ever more fickle-minded or contrary. They would stay in no road, no path. They broke out through the brush on all sides and flowed away in all directions, over rocks and hills and the roughest places they could find. And they must not be struck or roughly accosted. Sandy could bear to see them treated in the ways unbecoming of their rank. The troublesome most old sow of the lot had to be called my lady and your highness like the rest. It was annoying and difficult to scour around after hogs in armor. There was one small countess with an iron ring in her snout and hardly any hair on her back. That was the devil for perversity. She gave me a race of an hour over all sorts of country, and then we were right where we had started from, having made not a rod of real progress. I seized her at last by the tail and brought her along squealing. When I overtook Shandy, she was horrified and said I was in the least degree indelicate to drag a countess by her train. We got the hogs home just at dark, most of them. The Princess Neverons de Borgana was missing, and 2 of her ladies in waiting, namely Miss Angela Bohun and the Demoiselle Elaine Countermain, the former of these 2 being a young black sow with a white star in her forehead, and the latter a brown one with thin legs and a slight limp in the forward shank on the starboard side. A couple of the tryingest blisters to drive that I ever saw. Also among the missing were several baronesses, and I wanted them to stay missing. But no, all that sausage meat had to be found, so the servants were sent out with torches to scour the woods and hills to that end. Of course, the whole drove was housed in the house, and great guns. Well, I never saw anything like it, nor ever heard anything like it, and never smelt anything like it. It was like an insurrection in a gasometer.